And then I'm going to turn it over to our presenter today, Jane Woodward. Jane, it's all you.
Whoopie doo. Here we go. Welcome, everybody. Where did I put it? There it is, I think. Whoops. I had it. Slideshow. Resume slideshow. There you go. Hey, it worked. This is actually the first time I've been doing a
Jane, we're
slideshow.
still seeing your the file that says State of the Union. I think you might need to unshare your screen and share again. Yeah, give it another shot. That's great, Jane.
Oh, good. We practiced this once. I did it right the first time. Doesn't always stick. All right. Well, welcome. I have the opportunity to do this because the individual, one of my neighbors who was going to do one on this date, got a sudden conflict with work. And I said, fine, we'll switch you to the spring. And then it's like, well, are we just going to, eliminate the talk? Or, by the way, I have a few things I'd like to talk about. So I put myself on the line to do something that I've been watching for months and months and months now. And I put together this presentation. I will make it available to any of you who are interested in getting a copy of it later. Um, just send me an email about it and I will be happy to send it to you. But what I want to talk about is basically the state of our union. I do have a background as an attorney. I worked at EPA, I worked at the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., doing program evaluation at state, local level, federal, state, and local level. We were putting together evaluations of federal, state, and local government regulations. We were doing all kinds of fun things. I went to law school after I'd gotten a master's degree in educational communications and technology and was working in the field of education. And then happened to watch the Watergate hearings. And I decided to pick up and go to Washington and go to law school. And it went on from there. I had to be somewhat invested in the concept that we have a constitution, that we have a rule of law, that we have a republic. And so my subtitle is The Undermining of the Republic, because basically they aren't doing their jobs. So I don't know how many of you had the opportunity. Oh, by the way, feel free to put questions in the chat. Raise your hands if you want to say something, or just unmute yourself and say something. But otherwise, I'm just going to go on through. I don't know how many of you got the chance to watch Ken Burns' American Revolution that's been on starting Sunday night all the way through uh, Friday night, 2 hour episodes going through the founding of the Republic, which was incredibly, it took years, almost a decade before they ended up with our Constitution and our system of uh, three, hopefully, equal branches of government. The concept was to create three co-equal branches in order to prevent any one of them from dominating, because they understood people. They understood there were power struggles and that there is a tendency to have the executive take over power. That's avoided in England because they have a parliamentary system, and you vote in that the Tories or whomever, the Labour or whatever, and then they select the person in charge. But it's a temporary thing and can be changed pretty much at any time. We also have federalism. In other words, power is not allocated to the federal government or relegated to the states and the people, which is very important. In order to protect the people, as they were developing this, they basically said, we need a Bill of Rights of the people. How are we going to make sure that the people can be protected against government overreach and unchecked authoritative behavior? There are now 27 of them, but the first 10 were required in order to make this system operate and ensure power to the people. And the issue becomes, will people assert their rights when they are challenged or forfeit them due to either inertia or fear? So that's kind of what this is all about. The system was set up to counteract the natural rights of men and women, but particularly men, to compete for power. And so the question is, how well are we doing? We have the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And the judicial branch obviously has a whole slew of inferior courts, such as the, we have a lot of the legislation has been challenged and has gone to the federal district courts, where it has been decided and then can be appealed to the next level and ultimately appealed to the Supreme Court. So I'm not going to read all this to you. I'm just going to show you this is available to you. All legislative powers are vested in the Congress, and they go to the state. It consists of the state and House, and they were deliberately set up in a way that to try to balance the difference in populations among states. So every state gets two senators regardless of population. And then the Congress people the number of them depends on the population of the states. So that's try to make sure that we have a balance even within the legislature, that the people who have less population don't get overwhelmed, because we're really not a democracy. We're a republic. And people always talk about the problems of really losing our democracy. We never had a democracy. Okay. The people are represented by their legislators. And California obviously has a huge number because we have a huge population. But we don't really, as senators, we can't override everybody else because we actually aren't a democracy. We have higher representation in the legislature, but that doesn't mean diddly squat in the Senate. So that's a way of balancing power between the two branches of the legislature. Okay. So I explain this to you. You're welcome to read it. I stuck it all in here so you could read it without going and searching it out like I did. But here's at least some portion of my indictment of the Congress. I'm basically alleging that the Congress is failing to do its job. It's allowed the president to assume its taxation, tariff, war declaration, investigated, and other legislative powers. For example, it's the sole entity authorized to declare war and has not insisted the president consult Congress before threatening or engaging in foreign military activity. For example, the bombing of Iran, the threatening of Venezuela and the bombing of their boats, the push to try to encourage Greenland to become part of the United States. the rationale behind that is that Greenland is nice and cold. If you're going to put data centers there, you don't have to use a lot of power to keep them cold. Has basically effective control over the waterways because of its positioning. So when we want to have our fleets or stop other fleets from going through, anyway, that's one of the reasons that we're interested. And the other thesis is that there is a belief system going around that Trump has potentially bought into, that they are trying to divide the world into three spheres. The United States of America, and all the Americas. Russia, including Europe, and China, including the Southeast Asian countries, etc. So his moves toward Greenland, Canada, maybe Venezuela, etc., could be all part of that as a long-term concept. Now, he hasn't articulated that, but that, in the Panama Canal, he wants control, he wants to keep China out. So that's one of the, maybe it's a conspiracy theory, I don't know. I don't, I don't believe it is, but I think that's behind some of the thinking here. In any event, Congress is also the sole arm of government with the power to tax citizens and corporations. Tariffs, of course, are taxes, and John, the Chief Justice, has basically said so right at the beginning of that whole Supreme Court discussion of this when it was discussed. It's going to be interesting to see if he comes down that Trump doesn't have the power to tax and apply tariffs. That's going to be a big mess. It's already a mess. And only Congress can authorize them legally, of course. It has expressed no objection to the president's usurpation of that power. Congress has also failed to use its investigative powers to investigate executive misconduct or overreach, and use its subpoena powers to require executive staff testimony. They just don't show up. They just don't show up. And they do not subpoena them. Okay. All right. Where was I? Then there's the undermining of congressional laws. Congress is simply not requiring the president to implement the laws Congress has passed, but simply allowed the elimination or severe restriction of agencies and agency programs he doesn't like without consulting Congress. They haven't objected to his use of executive orders to just do it. One of the most obvious ones initially was the failure to shut down Congress for months after Congress passed that law. And instead, he's waited until he could set up investors who are conservatives to create conservative control of it, and been working on it out with China. They just wholesalely went out and eliminated USAID. I remember seeing them removing the letters on the building. They showed that video of them just taking those letters off. They tried to eliminate the Voice of America, but that's been reversed by the courts. But he did put somebody conservative in charge of it. So I don't know how functional it is these days. They're trying like heck to eliminate the Department of Education. They've been transferring the loan and grant programs like the Pell Grants and things like that to other agencies, and doing their darndest to try to get rid of it. They haven't succeeded so far, but they're close. They've attempted to eliminate the Bureau of Consumer Finance Protection that saved consumers billions of dollars. Mind you, I mean, they return the when the banks were, for example, charging all kinds of fees that were not legitimate, these were required to be returned to the consumers. Now, this has been reversed by the courts, so they're now just trying to cut the staff in half to kneecap it. They've, of course, withheld the funding allocated to the National Public Broadcasting Company it was already allocated through 2026. They just shut it down. Sorry, we're done. And Congress has allowed the Supreme Court to reinterpret its delegation of authority to the federal agencies to develop and use regulations to carry out the typically vague statutory mandate. When Congress writes a law, it says, you may do this, okay? And then it doesn't specify the ways and means of doing that. In other words, it's vague. So that they leave it up to the federal agencies to interpret how to implement that law, which they do by generating regulations. Well, very recently, that's been challenged of whether they're allowed to do that or the extent to which they can do that, cutting back the authority. Now, is Congress going to set the standards for these the details of how much of what you can put in what, how many dyes, how many this, how many that can go in? No, Congress is not in a position to do that. But it's no longer obvious, and it can be challenged that the federal agency the regulations they've established can be implemented. That's still a work in progress. They haven't stopped the president from illegally withholding funds from programs Congress has passed, even though those programs were the product of a bipartisan compromise, which has made the Democrats very upset because it's like, okay, we worked our butts off to get a compromise. And then he just said, no, sorry, I'm not going to fund it. And that's coming from the Office of Budget. So that has upset the apple cart. The minority party, being the Democrats, no longer trust any agreement they make with the majority because the president can just pull it back and the majority party won't object. So that's really created a mess and a lack of trust, which is why we ended up with the shutdown. Because it's like, okay, we could agree to X, but even if we do make that agreement, you won't follow through. Congress has put presidential nominees in positions for which they're not qualified and who are clearly intending to follow the president's orders rather than congressional mandates of the Constitution. Congress has not challenged their credentials or the lies promulgated by these prospective nominees, and that's how we actually got a couple of our Supreme Court justices who basically said, oh, I believe in precedent, and then jumped all over it. They didn't object to Elon Musk's Doge role in simply firing employees and eliminating programs en masse, or hacking and consolidating federal database with the excuse of the need to identify illegal immigrants. So these individual databases that have been deliberately kept sacred and separate, and there are examples where when the person in charge of the databases said no, they fired them. So sorry, bye, you can't stop us. Congress has allowed the president to fire public employees without due cause in spite of the civil service rules, which they just walk all over, along with the inspectors general in most departments whose job was to oversee the agency's operations and investigate corruption and inefficiency, which is the alleged purpose of Doge. So that's a huge problem. They eliminated the official regulators of the agencies. The leader of the House simply shut down the government rather than negotiate with the minority party to address their concerns about the impact of the big, beautiful bill on health care and avoid signing in the Democratic representative who would provide the 218th vote needed to require release of those files. Mind you, the executive simply ignored the House's request subpoena of the files. And they've used the budget tactic of reconciliation to pass the big, beautiful bill to avoid the Senate's 60-vote filibuster rule, thus allowing the majority party to avoid consultation with the minority party on proposed legislation and pass it without bipartisan support. However, they did basically refuse the president's demand to eliminate the filibuster in order to get what he wanted done. That was a first. That was the first sign of a backbone of the Republican members of Congress and the Senate. They have not followed for years the normal legislative budgetary process of passing separate agency bills, resulting in the need to draft and pass huge omnibus bills to avoid missing deadlines to fund the government, without, of course, giving members adequate time to review and discuss the bill's provision, or those slipped in at the last minute by one legislator or the other. And they've ignored its own rules requiring sufficient time to members to review proposed legislation prior to voting for it. They've ignored the president's ignoring of the Posse Comitatus law, the use of armed services in U.S. citizens, mainly democratically run, despite the objections of the government and local officials. That's been all over the news, so I'm sure you've seen it. Instead, they've reduced the federal funds allocated to states and communities for local law enforcement, who would be the appropriate ones to be there. They failed to protect voter rights or overturn Citizens United, which has allowed the transfer of power to corporations and wealthy Americans. They've been ignoring the accumulating debt, now $38 trillion, or the need to balance the budget for decades since the Clinton administration, which was the last time it passed a balanced budget. They only get nervous when we show a concern about being able to sell our bonds. And many companies and countries are failing, either dumping them and not buying anymore. So that's how we fund our debt, by the way. We have to be able to sell them. So if you expect the rates to really go down, that's probably not going to happen because we need to be able to sell them. And the only way you can sell them is if the rates are high enough that people are willing to buy them, given the risk that we might default. Congress repealed many of the limits. Oh, this is over the years, okay, that they've repealed many of the limits on banks that were put in place following the 2008 recession and designed to prevent a repeat of that disaster. And they've not effectively addressed the increased use of private capital and fintech, which kind of goes around the bank regulations in any event. So we have no idea how much debt is being incurred there and when it might blow. They recently passed the Genius Act with the intention of authorizing and regulating cryptocurrencies while permitting them to be incorporated into 401ks and IRAs. This has been done to provide support for the dollar, whose dominance in the world market is being challenged. Only the bond and stock market seem to get the serious attention of both Congress and the president. Okay. During the Clinton administration, the Republican leader, Newt Gingrich, introduced the concept of the other party as the enemy. They used to work together, by the way. That's been aggravated by the failure of Congress members to actually live in and socialize with members of the opposing parties. They used to be in town many times on weekends. Families might actually live in the area. Now they leave on Thursday night and come back Monday night and are in business from Tuesday through Thursday. And they aren't getting time to spend with each other and have conversations and work on bipartisanship. So the demonization of the other has led to the inability of Congress to seriously consider or pass bipartisan legislation to address well-known problems, and led the public to conclude that Congress is indeed dysfunctional and unable to effectively consider and address public concerns and needs, causing loss of confidence in our institutions of government. And this in turn has led to an increased radicalization of the parties, with many of the former moderates from both parties now being registered as independents. I think it's somewhat like 30% Republican, 30% registered Democrat, and the rest 40% being independents. Now, that's not precise. But who do you need to appeal to if you want to get something done? Guess what? The independents. The former Republicans and former Democrats who have objected to the radicalization of their parties. Anyway, it's complicated. Now we're going to jump on the executive. I think you know what the powers are of the executive, so I'm not going to go through all this. You can read it later. But here's my indictment of the president. He's ignored political norms. Oh, does anybody have any questions? Do you want me to elaborate on anything, or being specific enough? Yes, no? I should look. Holler if you want me to say something. I've tried to make this apolitical, by the way. I'm just saying, this is my analysis. This is what I see happening from a legal point of view, from an evaluation of what's going on. Because everybody's responsible. It's not just one. The president has ignored political norms and constitutional and statutory provisions and restrictions to expand and centralize executive power by ignoring or override the powers assigned to Congress or the judiciary. The strategy and tactics are as follows. The establishment of DOGE, which I'm sure you all know about. And he basically, it's interesting because he appointed Elon Musk to take all the blame for what they wanted to do, which was just slash programs, get rid of employees, shut down the government. So that made everybody pissed off at Elon and really damaged the Tesla brand. And the president got away scot-free because he delegated it to Elon Musk, who made great plans about saving the government millions of dollars, and at best effort, they think maybe they succeeded in saving $150 billion, if that. So it wasn't very successful. And basically, they basically got offered incentives to get many people to resign who saw what was coming. And if they they got money until the end of September, I think, or the beginning of September, they got paid. So you didn't feel the results of it right away. But basically, they just announced that it's been shut down, by the way. He had fired the inspectors general in the 8 major agencies whose job was to identify government efficiency and corruption, and had saved billions of taxpayer dollars. So who did they get rid of? The guys that were going to save money and get rid of corruption. He fired, I don't know, half the IRS agents, or all the ones that had been added by the Biden administration, hoping to pursue wealthy individuals and corporations who were not filing or paying taxes. And so guess what? The result is the loss of needed tax revenues to address a deficit. So that was pretty dysfunctional, but he did it anyway. That wasn't an issue. There's been a barrage of almost daily executive orders designed by the president to be treated as laws to effectuate his desired cuts in agency programs and civil service employees, in total disregard of the nation's civil service laws or public union. It's like that nothing existed. He just did it. It's like shows up in his in his voice, in his mail. Truth Social. It's executive by Truth Social, but many of the orders are obviously drawn up and signed. He's been limiting the authority of executive agencies to propose and implement regulations. He's been threatening or actually canceling programs, projects, and grant funding to universities and nonprofit agencies in order to extort funding and undermine their independence and implement his DEI ideology. Some have capitulated, some sued. He's threatened law firms that either represented his opponents or hired them by denying them loss of access to the federal courts and security clearance, which means they can't practice law in the courts. They can't bring cases in the court. So it's like he's extorted them basically to provide millions of dollars of free legal services to the government in order to not get banned. So if they agreed, then he had them for millions of dollars of free legal services. Although those who challenged this illegal action won in court, making the others look really foolish. So a lot of people who were in those ones that capitulated left those firms and joined the ones that fought. So we still have the ability of the ACLU, et cetera, to challenge these executive orders. The pay going on, he's extorted hundreds of millions of dollars from the corporate owners of television stations whose planned mergers required approval by the FCC, who paid the demanded money out of fear of denial of approval and subsequently, of course, received approval as soon as they paid him. It's not been invisible, this stuff going on, unless you haven't had the time to keep track of it. He demanded the cancellation, I think ABC, the cancellation of Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel because he didn't like being criticized. Colbert's was successful. Kimmel's, there was so much public outcry that they had to reverse it. And the stations, basically Disney, etc., put them back on. Now he's raising Cain again because Jimmy Kimmel isn't always kind to him. He's instituted pay for play, soliciting or showing willingness, to accept millions of dollars in contributions, quote, to the president's inauguration, ballroom, or presidential library in order to curry favor or avoid undesirable corporate regulations, such as their fighting regulation of AI. You saw that great group of tech pioneers at his inauguration. Well, they were there to, they each paid at least $1 million to be there, directly to Trump. The development and promotion of presidential meme coins, which funneled money directly to the president and avoiding the laws requiring disclosures and limitations on contributions. In other words, if you buy enough meme coins, enough millions of dollars of meme coins, something like 80% of that money goes directly to the president. He's put them out there. And then they let him know that they've done that. And the top ones who did that were invited to a private dinner at the White House and given a tour. It's been very obvious what's going on. And then, of course, they get favors in terms of the operations they want to do or the taxation they want to avoid, or in one case, he got absolved. He got a pardon, I think, of the crime he'd committed. They've ignored Congress's law passed to shut down and require the U.S. purchase of TikTok because Trump suddenly realized it helped him win the election. And so the subsequent maneuvering to allow conservatives such as Ellison and Murdoch to partner in purchasing the company once the deal is made with China. So there goes another media operation, which will become under conservative control and continue to operate in the United States, despite Congress's concern about how it was affecting young people. Let's see, tariffs, lawsuits, and bullying as bullying tactics. He's been using lawsuits for forever to not pay contractors. He has money, they don't, so they just lose. They can't fight. And that has continued to be his tactic. It worked so well as he was going bankrupt and not paying his contractors that he's now using it in the government. So he's been filing lawsuits against corporate media, claiming prejudicial editing of interviews, which if these lawsuits had been challenged, he probably wouldn't have won, but they were paid due to fear of business loss. The actual threat of imposition, the threat to impose or actually imposing tariffs to raise money, his rationale is we're raising money for the Treasury. We need it because of all this debt. We're trying to get other countries to lower or balance their tariffs in order to increase U.S. exports. And obviously to punish countries such as Brazil, China, but not Russia, by the way, when he's unhappy with their Brazil's internment of Bolsonaro, whom he favored, his buddy Bolsonaro. So he imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil. That's not exactly a legitimate use of the tariff. He then raised or lowered them vis-a-vis those who failed to respond to his wishes in an unpredictable way. Of course, he knew he was doing it so they could play with them when the stock market went up and down. When he imposed the tariff, the market went down. When he released the tariff, the market went up, and they could make money. So, and for example, when a Canadian ad was released quoting Reagan's speech against tariffs that offended him, he then stopped all negotiations with Canada. So he's been having a great time bullying his way around. This tariff unpredictability has led to major market volatility, business investment uncertainty, business and job loss, and loss of trust by U.S. and foreign business and industry in the United States' reliability and economic stability, and undermined alliances of longtime allies, damaging our foreign relationships and international leadership. Anyway, this is just a few of the things that have been done, which everybody's been watching if you've had time to watch as much news as I have managed to try to do in order to understand what's happening. Now we go on to the Department of Justice, which is our Article 3, and we have the Supreme and Inferior Courts, and much of the activity has been in the district courts, the federal district courts, where those who are aggravated by the illegal orders and activities, that's where they file their cases, many of them. So what's wrong with the Justice Department? Well, it's failing its mandate to defend the Constitution and laws and apply the rule of law equally and fairly at the federal level, and is merely doing the bidding of the president, serving as his private law firm. This is the department. Here's its traditional role laid out here. And here's actually what it's doing. It's resulted in the firing or forcing to resign of any career lawyer or prosecutor who resists White House pressure. It's replaced career lawyers with Trump loyalists who are often poorly prepared to prosecute the cases. I'll try to talk better. Sorry, let me get something to drink. This has undermined the presumption of truthfulness and reliability of government officials. Sometimes they lie, sometimes they don't follow proper procedure. They just don't know what they're doing. And that's become very obvious in the prosecution of Comey and others. It's proceeding with Schiff, probably, Adam Schiff. He's transferred the resources of the Justice Department and FBI to pursuing immigration enforcement to the detriment of pursuing other criminal and civil cases and anti-terrorism and national security cases. The initiation that role has been modified to function. Oh, I think I screwed up my PowerPoint. I'll have to fix that. They've dropped cases to gain presidential favor or funds assets to the president of his family. They pardoned individual supporters of the president, such as the January 6 rioters, regardless of whether they'd assaulted police officers or, I mean, it's been appalling. Former Trump supporters such as Michael Flynn and Rudy Giuliani. And they've failed entirely to pursue cases of corruption. Okay, other changes. They've followed issues and signed presidential executive orders directly or indirectly via his private True Social app to undertake investigations of the president's opponents or file criminal charges on what appears to be targeted efforts at the retribution he promised against his opponents. He makes no attempt at all to hide these directives or his political animosity, which is going to, of course, be used against him because it's obviously you're not supposed to do this. And so that's calling a number of his cases into account that they probably aren't legitimate. In fact, in some cases, he can't even get career prosecutors to sign the indictment because they don't want to be part of it. If it's really important, he terminates their employment there. They're not overseeing Homeland Security's ICE employee conduct of its immigration enforcement actions, where people, including citizens, are being forcibly removed from public places and private simply based on color of skin or Spanish speech by masked men rather than following the direction of only arrest and deport those with criminal records. They've, in many cases, some cases, deliberately ignored and violated. So this has been taken to court, and they've been, told not to do that, and they do it anyway. The justice is not properly overseeing the detention centers, where substantial abuse is being documented in terms of treatment of detainees, provision of legal defense. Congressional oversight is being denied. That was that whole place where Congress people are supposed to be allowed to go and observe, and that's been denied. They've been deporting detained immigrants to seriously dangerous countries where human rights abuses are well known, and they may well be killed. Other issues, they're refusing to release the Epstein files subpoenaed by Congress. It's initiated an investigation of Democrats to try to avoid having to release those files. They found an excuse. We'll see how long it lasts. Justice Department has directed most of its attention and that of the FBI to pursuit of illegal immigrants versus focusing on national and international crime and corruption and the protection of U.S. citizens from fraudulent schemes, scams, and counterterrorism, among others. The role of the Supreme Court in releasing the president from any criminal liability for actions taken in the course of his official presidential duties has been horrific. He now has no barriers as long as he can say, oh, but I'm doing my job. Supreme Court's use of the shadow docket overrule or put on hold lower court action ruling against the presidential's illegal acts has been tremendously problematic. That shadow docket allows a single judge to rule against the lower court and either rule against it or put it on hold, and does not provide for the normal hearing of cases or writing up of legal arguments for or against the court's action. So he's been doing that routinely, and depending on which judge he gets, because they're assigned to different courts in the country, depends on the outcome. But this is really it used to be used once in maybe 4 times a session, maybe. It's being used every time the president doesn't like the results of a lower court's decision. Here are a few of the major problems. Supreme Court has accepted the concepts that corporations are people and money is speech, which has undermined voting rights and the public trust and contributed to the great wealth disparity in the nation. Recent members reporting to the current Supreme Court, despite testimony professing acceptance of the value of president, have failed to honor it and overturn ones like Roe v. Wade, the Voting Rights Act, etc. The Supreme Court has not protected the nation from authoritarianism by releasing the president from any liability for criminal acts carried out while performing his duties. These guardrails have been removed, and there's nothing to stop his illegal acts except public disapproval and the lower federal courts that are ruling against his illegal executive orders and other violations of statutory and constitutional law. Their rulings are at risk of being ignored by the president or overturned by the higher level courts. So only you, the people, through lawsuits challenging government overreach, can change the current course toward authoritarianism. I'll have to learn to talk better. Nice long words, sorry. So in summary, the failure of Congress to exercise its powers granted by the Constitution and fear of the president and his political base of devoted followers has created a political vacuum, allowing the power to tilt toward the president to exercise those powers in their stead, reinforcing his tendencies toward authoritarian rule and centralization of power. The federal judiciary, in response to a barrage of lawsuits filed by the ACLU, Public Citizen, a group of Democratic state attorneys general, and other parties objecting to the president's illegal acts and breaches of the Constitution, has been the sole entity of the three branches that remains to curtail the power grabs of the executive branch, unless Congress changes its behavior and asserts its power. So multiple cases are currently before the Supreme Court, and with its 6-3 conservative majority, their outcomes remain unknown. These cases include everything from gerrymandering, voting rights, birthright citizenship, gay marriage, and presidential overreach. The United States is unique that the governmental powers are derived from the people versus from a monarch or religious entity through the right to vote designate its leaders. We are a republic, not a democracy. We vote to elect those individuals to represent us in Congress and the offices of president and vice president. When asked what kind of government we had created, Benjamin Franklin allegedly or famously responded, "A republic if we can keep it." And that is the question today. The Bill of Rights has multiple provisions designed to protect the rights of the citizens to maintain control of their government. And here you go. Most of them are implicit in the First Amendment. Freedom of speech, religion, the press, assembly, and petition. It prohibits Congress from restricting those rights, but does not apply to private individuals or companies, which you need to think. When I read that again, it's like, oh my goodness, what's the implication that who can in fact limit our freedom of speech? Religion, the press, assembly, and petition. Private companies, for example. So it doesn't say, it says Congress, but it doesn't say the executive. We should think about the implication of that. And I have made a list, a poll of all the amendments that are pertinent to our discussion here. So you can read them at your leisure. I pulled them together for you. So how do we go about correcting the imbalances? Well, that's up to us. We the people to correct them. Our powers are many. The right to vote, the right to protest through peaceable assembly, the right to lobby our legislators, state, local, and national, the right to exercise our free speech rights via the media currently available from public appearances, editorials, articles, books, Substacks, social media, and talks like this one. This is my means of hoping to inspire correction. and encourage you to do the same. Our support of public media and of protests and nonprofit groups like the ACLU, Public Citizen, NAACP, PBS, NPR, Indivisible, financially or by volunteering. They need money. They need support. Without us, it won't happen. We need to listen to and work with our neighbors and nonprofits to address common problems and propose solutions. We might even consider running for public office and not just bailing out. We need to do the research to identify the issues and their solutions and to understand different perspectives, always trying to understand the different points of view of the diverse peoples in our society and how to find commonalities. They used to say it was baseball. Now maybe it's switched to football. But what do we have in common as a society that we can put together and address solutions? And there's something called anticipatory obedience. FDR family said there's nothing to fear but fear itself, but really, we have lots of fears. Job or financial loss, retaliation against ourselves, our family, or our business, including worrying about employees, injury or death, estrangement from family or neighbors. And then there's something called anticipatory obedience, coined among others by Timothy Snyder, who's written a lot about this issue. It's the failure to exert your rights or challenge government demands, even if implied and not explicit, due to fear of retaliation and thus doing what the government wants without asking many times. Silence or inaction to avoid confrontation. And here's a batch of examples, okay? But this is what happens with a lot of people. It's like, well, it's not my problem. Well, it's not your problem. So my response is don't just stand there, for goodness sakes, do something. The fate of our republic is in your voice, your hands, and your feet. Talk to your family and friends, your neighbors, write articles, distribute pamphlets, send money, march in protests and to the voting booth. I mean, many people ask me, well, what can I do? Well, there are a whole slew of things that you can do. We must speak and speak the truth always. No fake facts. We, the people, must speak and speak the truth always. Must listen to other points of view with respect. Don't be afraid to express your own. Find our commonalities. We all want clean air and water, affordable housing, food and health care, good jobs to sustain it. We need to work together for the common good. If Trump and Mandani can pull it off, so can we. I don't know how many of you watched that, but it's interesting. The end of the beginning. Let's meet the challenge. It's in our best interest to do so. We've had challenges before and overcome them. There's a whole history of it, and that's part of what's fascinating about our history. We've had many challenges, and we've overcome them, and we can do it again. And I do thank you for listening. And that is the END. You can email me for a copy of this. I hope this has been helpful and encouraging. I think people were concerned that this would be a downer. It's not a downer. It's just, here's what's going on. And you can all participate in making the changes that we need to make. And I hope you will do so. Anybody have questions, comments, what have you? I've just talked my voice out. Yes, yes, yes. No, no, no.
Yeah, Jane,
Yeah.
this is Tom Boyer.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah, after Trump pardoned the January 6th rioters,
Uh-huh.
I made a statement to the local Micmac here in McKinleyville, but it kind of didn't fall on deaf ears so much, but it fell on a situation where nobody seemed to be able to do anything about it because it was out of their purview. In other words, other than writing a note to the to Jared Huffman or our senators, it seems like we're powerless to actually do anything, anything productive anyway. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't agree with you, obviously. Um, that's why I'm doing this. It's like, oh, here's an opportunity. I can tell people what's going on. I can tell people and show people what you can do. We have a voice. We can write articles for senior news. They have opinions. We can write articles to put in every media we have. We can show up. We can do a zillion things. There's no reason. I mean, I'm old enough. Who gives a dang?
I'm not saying we can't do those things, but they don't seem to be effective.
Well, it's effective one-on-one. All right. You talk to your neighbor and you say, I'm going to go help at the food bank. You want to go along? You can put together a team of people. I mean, look at what happened with the rallies. We just had each time we have a rally, we jump by 2 or 3,000 people. I think the first one was what, 3,000, then it jumped to 5,000, then it jumped to over 7,000. The next one should be over 11,000. Don't be afraid to go. It's very reinforcing. It feels good to see all your neighbors, and all those signs are fantastic.
I don't doubt that it feels good, but even in the New York Times and the Washington Post, they seem to be empty gestures. In other words, they're making us feel good, but they're not changing anything.
Well, I think they do inspire people to try to make a difference. Go ahead,
Yes,
Jen.
I really feel that what you and I would like would be to have immediate change and have the big bad guy go away so that we don't have to wait 3 more years for the vote to elect people who will start dismantling all the damage that has been done. But in the end, because we vote nationally every 4 years, we have to connect with other voters. We have to be well informed. And if anything, I think, Jane, it would be a really good idea to include on your handout a list of really honest, good, solid, reputable Substacks for people to get their information. I think that this age group, we take time to read things like that. We want to be informed. We have enough experience to know that we need to be informed, but we also need to have access where we can get good information. And Tom, I'm right with you. From day one, I wanted that to end, but it's not going to end that quickly or that easily. And the way for us to all be united when it does end is for us to be one big community that basically agrees on everything. And I just don't see any other way to do it except for us to be active locally. Because, there's no way that I can go to DC and make a change. There are people in DC that are letting us down. We need to vote in the right ones so that they can work for us after this next election and after the next one.
We can go to our local council meetings and raise suggestions and say, okay, what are we going to do about X? Whatever it happens to be. We can obviously vote. We can participate in local nonprofit groups supporting the food bank or supporting, there are any number of great nonprofit organizations that we can help. We think nationally, but act locally, I guess is what it boils down to. Diane, you had a question?
Well, I would like to comment about what we can do. So the powers that be are the people that have the multi-billionaires, and we can have rolling actions where we get a huge number of people for 1 or 2 days to get off of Amazon or 1 or 2 days to get off of Google, don't use them at all. And this bites into their profit because that's all about making profit and using everything that we say online to train their AI. So if we can do this, that is an immediate short-term way to get their attention and let them know that, when you hit them in the pocketbook, that's when they pay attention. And that's when Trump, if he gets the idea that they're not happy, that Bezos isn't happy, that Musk isn't happy, that, the people, that Stephen Miller and Vogt and the people, the three powers that really rule everything are unhappy, then he will take notice. So
It's the power of
I
the boycott.
recommend, if you want to know more about how this actually, yes. And then the other thing is read David Sirota's,
You're breaking up, Diane.
David Sirota's, it's going to
We can't hear you for some
read
reason.
could put it in the chat. Thanks. Bye.
Good. Sorry.
I had a question of historical. And I'm always been curious why, like in England and all of Europe, they don't have the president. They have the prime minister,
Prime Minister. It's a
which
whole
is
different system.
is so much more fair and just because you're then electing a person that is capable of forming a consensus. And to me, I've always wondered why in the world do we have a president? Do you think it has to do with George Washington? I mean, I just have no idea why such a why we ended up with this president thing.
I think it has a lot to do with their recognition that there are so many there are different states with different cultures. We have the Indians, we have all these states that want to keep their rights somehow. So that's why they had to create the federalist system, where the state, the national government has certain powers and the states retain ones that the feds don't have, and they can all counterbalance each other. And if they were going to have an executive, what they didn't have at the time were parties. There were no parties per se that were organized at that time. They were all just working out. So what they had was state interests, different cultural interests, but they didn't. This is how they resolved it. That's how they had to figure out to resolve it. So we have a three-tier system. We have the feds, we have the states, and we have the people. And then under the states, we have all these local governments. So it's very complicated. And, France, by comparison, is not complicated. England is tiny. And so they came up with a complicated system, but it works as long as it doesn't get out of control like it has. And it's got a number of features that have allowed that to occur. I tried to touch on a number of them, but it is out of control right now. It's hanging on by its nails by the courts and the public that is suing. Without the courts, we would have lost. So as long as we can outlive Trump and the system can maintain judicial control, or unless Congress finally decides to assert and keep a backbone and take control. Because as the president's popularity goes down, which is way down, they can't count on him to save their butts, and particularly not in the midterms because he isn't on the ballot. So that allows everybody else to exert their influence by voting. He has lost. It's not, people were for shutting down the border. They were not for arresting people who'd been here for 25 years and were the local school principal and dragging them out of the office. So it's the way they've implemented the immigration. I mean, he wants to get all the non-whites the heck out of here so that they maintain white dominance. That's my theory. Okay. If you don't have birthright citizenship, you stop the ability of all the non-whites to propagate here, people to fly in from China and have their baby, and then that's a U.S. citizen. I mean, this is a strategy to maintain male white control is my theory. Okay, but it's a theory. But I think that's what's behind this all. And they obviously want to maintain control by the moneyed interests, just like where we started. At the beginning, we had only propertied white males controlling the government. And we've changed that over the decades. There's a question from John Clark. Can the minority party take legal action against the president for taking illegal actions? Sure. I mean, it would have to be, it's just like not the minority party. Any party can gather together. The attorneys general of the democratic controlled states, have joined together to file suit against the president, against the executive orders. So yes, they could do that as a party. They haven't tended to do that as a party. They've relied on collaboration of like ACLU doing it, or NAACP, or any of these organizations have done it. Let's see, would IKW have time for group discussion? Yes, we do. What can we do other than wait for the elections? All kinds of stuff. We can talk to others about, like I have a neighbor who thinks the president's going to be the greatest president in time. Well, we talk about it. I ask, have you read this? Did you watch the January 6th presentations, etc.? And the answer is no. So you encourage them to look at other options. So, I mean, we have to get informed ourselves as much as possible. Is it illegal for Trump to modify the various departments to them? Well, depends on how he does it. If he uses the excuse that, I mean, he's in charge of the executive. And if it goes against what the Congress has authorized, then it's not legal, but he does it anyway unless they stop him, and they haven't been stopping him. And it's illegal to do it for his personal benefit, but many of the things he's been done have also been for his personal benefit. Yes, it's in the Constitution, the emoluments clause. He shouldn't be accepting a private airplane that's all gilded and looks like Trump. He shouldn't be accepting, in essence, gifts of mem coins. That's what they are. It appears that impeachment is the only way of stopping Trump, and that it may occur in 2027, but only if the Democrats get control of the House of Representatives. Otherwise, they won't be able to pass it, and then it depends on whether they can get enough votes in the Senate to actually do it. They couldn't before. Everybody would have to get really upset in the Senate as well as the House in order to make that work. They could, under Article 25, I think, not Article 25,
Yeah.
the Amendment 25, they could go after him and put a case together, and who's going to do that? But they could. Let's see. Motto of the Washington Post is democracy dies in darkness. Yes, I agree. Kay says she's going to write the senators of every state that I've lived in. Yes, you can do that. Brian says, read James Carville's opinion piece in the New York Times today and needed change in the Democratic Party. Yeah, we got to kind of, I mean, the other points of view aren't getting adequate illumination in the news media. And we're having to go to Substacks and things like that in order to get some of the people that we need to be listening to. Christy, I'm looking forward to the midterms, but I'm concerned that Trump might engineer some uproar, such as a pandemic or a war, to postpone the elections. I wouldn't suggest he might try. He'll try whatever he can because he's scared to death because he's going to lose control of the House. If he loses control of the House, he could be impeached again. So he's just doing whatever he can do in order to avoid try to control. He's trying to get rid of mail-in voting, but he doesn't have control of mail-in voting. That's under the control of the states. But I mean, what he engineered before was almost effective if Pence had gone along with it and they couldn't get agreement on the electors, it would have been delegated. The decision of who to become president would have been delegated to the states. Now, there were more Republican states than Democratic. This was the strategy. Get it thrown out of the decision, which had to be made by that date in Congress, and get it delegated to the states. And there were more Republican states than Democratic, so we would have had a continuation of Trump. That's what the plot was. And they almost got it if Pence hadn't stood his ground. We would have had a continuation of Trump. I don't know if people realized what was going on and how they were trying to pull that off. Tom, did you want to say something?
Yes, a couple things. Another person to consider on reading is Heather Cox Richardson.
Oh, she's great. Yes.
Yes,
And
and
Richard
Yeah, the
Brown.
contrarian.
yeah,
Yeah.
and one of the things that's bothering me is Citizens United, of course, but also what these summary judgments are, emergency judgments are from the Supreme Court. I don't understand the mechanisms of that because I don't think there's anything in the Constitution about summary judgments of one or two judges.
It's the shadow docket.
Yeah, the shadow docket.
Yeah, and when you need an immediate decision from the Supreme Court, it goes into the shadow dock, and he's been misusing it, and they've gone along with it. And so I believe there is a particular judge, Supreme Court judge assigned to each region.
Yeah.
And so if you want, I don't know how there's a rotation of judges in like in each state. And I don't know if they have a rotation at the Supreme Court. So whatever judge you get may be the next one in line for the rotation, or the one that happens to be up at midnight to find it.
It's Alito for the next decision.
Oh, so it is a rotation? Yeah.
I don't know if it's a rotation, but Alito's got the one that's in right now.
Right now, yeah. So the bottom line is you get one person looking at it. There's no written opinion. He makes a decision. He put the decision on hold for subsequent review. I presume they'll take it up on some expedited basis, but meantime, they just put it on hold. And so it's held up many things till they get around to visiting it. It's an abuse of the emergency declaration by the president because he doesn't like the result of the lower court, but he's been using it just like he's been using executive orders, and he's getting away with it. And then I'm not
Well,
aware. But go ahead, Diane.
the Supreme Court is rewriting the Constitution.
Well, yeah,
They're
are.
effectively rewriting it. Yeah. And so if people aren't aware of it, I go back to what I sent to you, that the 1803 decision in which they gave themselves the power to write law. Now, there are other democracies or republics that have Supreme Courts that do not have this right, and it functions just fine. And so Congress has in the Constitution, it says they have the power to take this away from the Supreme Court and say, no, you don't have the power of judicial review. And that, if that ever happened, that would end it right there. That's one aspect, because from the very get-go, we didn't have a balance and checks and balances because the people, that's where it's been as shown so vividly in the new documentary by Ken Burns, The American Revolution, because they had the opinion that it was only propertied men and wealthy people who were intelligent enough to actually run a government. And so they set it up like that. And that's why they set up the Senate, which wasn't even elected until we passed the amendment that said the Senate has to be elected. So
They were
if
appointed.
if we keep that in mind, this outlines what we need to do. And so as I put into the chat, then there's another aspect of this also. So starting in the 70s with the Lewis Powell Memorandum, that was the beginning of this whole Project 2025 thing, which we are under right now and is being carried out. And so if you read Sirota's master plan, that really highlights all of these aspects of that. And the other thing is to work on changing our voting system. So right now we're winner take all, which means that a small percentage of people can have their choice take place. And if we had even ranked choice voting would be an improvement, but the better improvement is proportional representation. So these are some things that we could create as our Project 2026 and contact these people who are running for office and have them sign a pledge that they're not going to take corporate money, they're not going to take PAC money, they're not going to do XYZ. And we could, get people into office in 2026 that at least would be going along those lines as a beginning. Thanks, pass.
Well, I'd like to just make a comment here, which is that I think you're absolutely right that it was a white patriarchal project in the beginning, and everything was designed to assume that white men were never threatened seriously. However, the threat posed by the women having the vote, blacks having the vote, the Hispanic, the DEI posed a incredible threat to white male. I would say white supremacy, and so in a way they've already lost the game. This is just a crazy moment where they're willing to just to maintain their power and their money, they're willing to sacrifice democracy. But I personally think that the population has shifted to the point now where it is inevitable that the DEI will create a brand new Congress that has some of those values that you're talking about. I don't know who just spoke, but the values of a liberal democracy.
Jean, I think I totally agree with you. And I think we will come out ahead on all this, but it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of involvement of those of us who care. And what is the concept? It takes 3.5% of the population to change direction in a country. And that was, I think they calculated that as being 11.9 million people. And we already are up to over 7. Okay, when we protest. So we simply have to be willing to put in the time and energy and push for what we think is important. And there's no reason we can't. I mean, I've started this conversation here. I would welcome any of you. I started out just writing it up and then I put it on PowerPoint, and I'm by nowhere means done. Diane, you have a lot to contribute. I just ran out of time. I had about 4 days, 5 days to try to put this together along with other things I was doing. So, but if we take the time and work together, whether we want to set up a group of people who say, yes, I want to do this, let's put together a plan. Let's put together the 2026 plan. How we're going to change this, what we're going to propose, what we're going to propose be changed in the Constitution, what we're going to be proposed in voting rights. And we need to get, I mean, what drives me nuts is that the Democrats' program seems to be anti-Trump. It's not, here's what we want to accomplish. We need a platform of what we want to create, what needs to be changed, what laws should be modified, how we're going to take back control, how the people are going to take back control of their nation. That's That's the program I haven't seen. The 2025 plan took 4 years to put together. And then the guys in charge of it are right in charge, vote in charge of OMB. Stephen Miller, who's the assistant to the president. These people, many of them are ensconced in office. We need to have something to, we need to have a group of people, probably all over the United States, get together and propose an alternative of what would be required, what we want in our society, what's needed. So I would encourage you all, if you want to let me know. I mean, I've got free time. I've got my brown bag lunch program done for the spring. I've finished my courses. I've finished my presentation, which just kind of intervened in my daily course. I'm going to be here. If you want to be part of a group of people to put together a proposed set of changes, it'll take work, research. A lot of you are experienced. We could put together a committee to tackle this issue. We can create a project 2026. And Diane, I know you'd love to do that. Right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, I'm in.
That's what I thought. I mean, the groups like Indivisible that actually come together and make decisions about what to lobby for and talk about it. This needs to be put in writing. This needs to be a platform. We need a new democratic, let's not call it demo, a Republican, an independent platform.
Well, what I'd like to see too is more town halls and town assemblies where if you think back to pre-revolution, the people in the colonies were used to talking with one another. They were used to making their own decisions locally. And that's what we have lost here. We're so separated from one another and from dialogue and considering these issues. And so it would start with, practicing, practicing talking with one another and examining our points of view, examining. I would recommend also reading a book by Robert Sapolsky, which is titled Determined, Why We Don't Really Have Free Will. And he cites all of the science that supports this. And I would also recommend a Science Friday program that says how do bacteria talk to one another? So this goes way back, and it helps us understand when we ask that question, how can people make these decisions to hurt other people? Some people ask that, and then the other people say, no, these are freeloaders, and we're not going to pay any taxes or give any money to these freeloaders. And those two opposing kinds of reactions. So if you read Determined, it would really help understand where that comes from and why it exists. So that's really fun. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. It's fascinating. Thanks.
Well, if those of you who are interested want to set up routine Zoom meetings where this could be discussed, let me know. It's not hard. I know several people who do that. They meet once a week for an hour and have a topic they're going to talk about that day. There's a presentation and then there's a discussion. And we can do this. We can get it going. It can be replicated all over the United States. So if you want to do something like that, email me, janepwoodward@aol.com. And we'll see what we can put together. We don't have to be in person. I mean, it's nice, but we can't get everybody together that way. But we can get everybody together on Zoom. And we can make that happen. Tom, delightful to have you in. I need to get people's email. Send me your email. It's janepwoodward@aol.com. So please send me your email address if you're interested in doing this, because I'll need it. for Zoom. So Diane, send it to me. Whomever wants to play with this topic, Jean. Is it Jean or Jeannie?
Jean.
Jean Gallic?
Gallic. J.P. Woodward.
Jane, Janep, Woodward, P as in Paul, Woodward, Woodward, at AOL.com.
Okay.
I mean, there's no reason we can't get something going. Why not? We can have a good time in any event, but we can certainly tackle it. I've got to finish all the stuff that goes in my presentation as well.
I think it'd be interesting also to have some of these books that you suggest to read
Sure.
as a basis for discussion.
Sure.
My personal interest would be in a new economics that would create prosperity for the middle class. Did I say my personal interest would be a new conception of economics that would allow for prosperity for everybody or for middle class? Because I think that's very possible, but we're just stuck with this old vision of how money works.
Well, that vision is changing at a very, very rapid pace. And they're coming out with all kinds of new visions of what the economy would look like. But yeah, let's go for it.
More than welcome to continue speaking. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording at this point.